The PRovoke Podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Welcome to the PRovoke Media Podcast. So today we have with us Reggie Dance, who is the VP at Coyne Communications. And I was just actually talking to Reggie. He's been there for 8 years, huh?
Yes. Hold on. Let me look at my LinkedIn and double check.
Well, okay. Well, you can double check that. But Reggie wrote, the reason we had invited Reggie on today is Reggie wrote a piece last week called "Dear Corporate America, Acknowledge, Listen, and Take Action." And it's a great piece, and we'll have a link to it here in the show notes. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk to Reggie about kind of how Coyne is advising brands to act in this kind of pivotal moment, as we are, amid these protests in the U.S. about racial justice, specifically about Black Lives Matter. Well, welcome to the show, Reggie.
Thank you for having me. And it's 8 years and 9 months at Coyne.
Oh, wow, you could have rounded up and you just could have said 10 years.
After about 5 years, you kind of stop counting.
Yeah, you'll be a decade-er soon enough. So Reggie, thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for writing this piece. So, one of the things that you and I were talking about before we got started was what's different this time around. I mean, there's a lot of things that are different, but one thing that's been notable with brands is brands are actually saying Black Lives Matter this time.
Right.
They're not just saying, let's stand up to hate, let's stand up to racism. They are really specifically talking about what's at stake here. And I wanted to get your take on that and why you think that's changed.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's fantastic that, a lot of brands and, the general public as a whole has, finally started to accept the term Black Lives Matter and understand what that means and, not take it as a negative connotation as it has in the past. But I think it comes from a lot of brands understanding that you have to take accountability and, acknowledge what the issue is. And, the issue in America has been racism. And, the issues with, police reform or, police brutality have really brought things to light, with this pandemic. And it's really finally, I like to think that, in America, it took a pandemic and no sports for people to finally start to listen and understand what is going on in this country. Mm-hmm. So, you have that time frame where you could really organization. I think that's what's happening. And a lot of it is also you have consumers who are no longer accepting the status quo. Mm-hmm. If we're gonna support you, you have to support us as well. And I think that's a reflection of what you're seeing today.
Right. So, one of the things that you mentioned was sort of acknowledgement in your piece. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to ask you what that looks like.
So it starts with, a simple thing, saying Black Lives Matter. Yeah. That's acknowledgement. Saying that there's racism going in the country, because a lot of times, people will take their own perspective and say, well, I don't see it. Or, in my mind, there isn't much racism. And if it is spread out, few and far in between. So it's not that bad of an issue. And I think now people are starting to really see that it's a lot bigger than what they originally thought and taking into account other people's feelings as opposed to their own experiences. So I think that's why you're starting to see that acknowledgement.
So, one of the things that I've noticed this time around is it seems like brands are making 2 pledges, right? Especially, the ones that are speaking up. One is they're reflecting their own D&I practices, how they recruit, retain, and also promote, not only people of color, but their Black employees. And then on the other side, I mean, when you're saying things like Black Lives Matter and you're writing checks to some of these organizations, you're also making a pledge to fight systemic racism, right? The bigger institutional problem. I mean, do you feel like that's how brands are thinking about this? Is there are 2 fronts to this? this issue?
Yes, definitely. I feel like they're finally taking an extra step because, in years past, you would see brands part of, I guess their community service or, their give back initiative. They would donate monies to different organizations. But that's all it would really be. You never really saw what the action plan was, or what the follow-up was, or an actual partnership with these organizations that they're donating money to. It's almost like writing a check and just kind of moving on with your business per se. So now I see that a lot of brands are really taking that extra step and, donating, but also, creating a plan to work together. So it's really good to see. Obviously there's some brands who are really leading the charge, and others are still have a lot of work to do. But what I've seen is, you have brands that are recognizing that we have to do our part as well. So which is great.
Yeah, I'm curious which brands you think are doing the best job. I mean, I did it.
I've been amazed at what I've seen from Ben and Jerry.
Yeah, that's what that one keeps coming up. Yep.
I never had Ben and Jerry before, but now, like, that's my brand. I go out and buy some Ben and Jerry. Like, I haven't seen a brand that has been as forceful and, putting their stake in the ground. Never mind politics, never mind where you stand. This is what we believe. This is who we're about, and this is what we're going to do. So I think Ben and Jerry has been fantastic. You've always seen brands such as, Nike that have been very, very progressive for years now, always been a leader. But, this past weekend, you saw brand Jordan take a step further and say, we're going to donate $100 million over 10 years. And, you see Michael Jordan coming out and personally taking a stance, someone who's been criticized heavily over the years for not speaking up. So when you see brands like that, like if you're going to donate a check, they're really donating a check. They're really making a difference. Mm-hmm. So Amazon as well, when you go out and see one of the world's richest men in the world go out and post a response to a customer, and, it really shows that, people are noticing, what we bring to the table, why we should be treated equally as people, and, just acknowledging that the world needs to change. And as one of the most influential brands in the world, we're going to help direct that. Because I think what people realize now is, things are going to change, I feel like, finally. And what side of history are you going to be on when this happens? Are you going to be a brand that is silent and, just kind of very passive and don't take a position? Or are you going to be known as one of the brands who were a leader or who fought for the movement for, to end racism in America?
So I want to return to that in a second, because I am curious if you're counseling brands that are hesitant to what their what their reasoning is. But I want to go back to, you talked about the $100 million over 10 years, and that's kind of a long-term commitment.
Right.
So I'm curious, as you're advising brands, how can brands make this commitment not only sustainable but also scalable, right? So that they can apply this across their offices, across brands, if it's a bigger company, how other people can borrow it and amend it to their own goals and their own organizations. So we all know that eventually the hashtags will stop trending, that the protests will kind of fade out. How do we keep this front and center this time, after all of those, after the momentum isn't nearly as strong?
Okay, I think that's where the partnerships come into place, because obviously, right now it's a big topic and it's front and center. But a couple of months from now, when NFL season starts and people are start to be distracted and go start resuming their normal lives, you want to make sure that this movement continues. And it starts with going back and organizing with different groups within your communities where you do business. I think that's very important. But it's also starting and maintaining a dialogue with your employees, because if your employees are in an environment where they feel that they can, speak their mind and, offer some solutions, then that's going to continue because your employees are going to hold you accountable as an organization, and they're going to become the drivers of, whatever initiative you stand by and support. So, those are the things that are really going to drive it. But then also from a consumer standpoint, it's really at a point where people are fed up, and if you're not supporting us, you're against us, basically. So I think people are.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I am curious about, like, are there brands that are, that are coming to you and saying, look, like, we don't know what to say, and maybe hesitant, even though there's plenty of examples right now. I mean, I don't know if your experiences. It seems like most consumer brands are putting a stake in the ground here. Or do you have brands coming to you that are not sure or that are confused, and advising them?
Absolutely. That's actually what sparked the blog. So after having several conversations, you had some brands that, wanted to be at the forefront, but others, they weren't sure. They wanted to play it safe. Or, they just kind of felt like, we should be quiet on this one. We're not experts. Or, maybe we haven't been the most vocal organization as a whole, so we don't want to seem authentic, and, we don't have the credibility to back up what we're saying. So it was after those conversations, and really having some brands come back and, kind of wanted to play conservative. And then after reading the blog, come back and say, you know what, we're going to take a different stance. That I felt that made things worthwhile. Really, a matter of really having those honest and uncomfortable conversations, because they were very, very uncomfortable. And, really taking a moment to reflect as an organization what you stand for and what you're about.
That keeps coming up in all the conversations I'm having, is this idea that we need to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
That's very, very true.
And that, one of the things you point out is, organizations need to make sure that employees feel like they can speak their minds without fear of corporate backlash, or just being labeled, I think you mentioned in your blog, sort of an angry Black person.
Right.
What can organizations do right now to make it safe? Because for people to speak out, because one of the things that, as I talk to leaders, is so many of them are doing these town halls, these sort of listening sessions. And I'm curious kind of how you can make that both safe and also effective levers of change.
Right. I think it's going to start with building some sort of trust, because you can do a town hall and still feel, I really can't speak up my mind unless it's coming from senior leaders. If your senior leaders aren't speaking up, if your senior leaders aren't taking that extra step to reach out to, their Black employees and really have those personal human conversations to say, hey, how are you feeling? What's going on with you? Or, just giving them an opportunity to, express themselves and just show that you have concern as a human being, those are trust builders. And, from there, you can start to have those conversations outside of the general company listening session or town hall and event session, because that's what you don't want it to be, is perceived as event session. Really, opportunity for some honest dialogue on what you can be doing as an organization, because there's always room for improvement.
Yeah, and I wonder, because, I was reading something about how, like, for a lot of people, it's quite, and it shouldn't be, but because, it's not their fault, but it's embarrassing to talk about some of their encounters with racism, and talking about it in a public forum may not feel comfortable, even if it is safe. Some people may not want to do that. Do you think having some of these conversations in a more intimate environment maybe would help, like having, smaller groups or doing one-on-ones? Because, obviously people also are not doing them in person right now, right? They're having these virtual Zoom conversations. So it can feel really, I would imagine, intimidating to have like 50 or 100 people, like, right, on a Zoom call trying to talk about a really sensitive issue that hits people really personally.
Yeah, I think so. But I also think that people are so angry that you want to share your experiences because you want to, make it known what our experiences are. You want to almost educate people to say, hey, my experiences are completely different from yours, and here are just a few examples of that. I know personally, I spoke about that a little bit in my blog. Those are things that typically in the past I would have just kind of kept to myself or maybe shared with a couple of people. But, you want to take it upon yourself to, just really educate people. I think it all depends on the person, but now so more than ever, people are so angry that they want to share those experiences as much as possible. I mean, you'll see it on the workplace, I believe, social media for sure. I think the environment is welcoming to it now more so than ever before.
One of the things that that comes up again and again and again, and I've been covering diversity for a long time, is these microaggressions, these moments that are so subtle that they're almost impossible to talk about with somebody who didn't see it or doesn't get it.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons that we see people of color, but especially Black employees, not stay at organizations, not be promoted into the leadership ranks. What advice would you give the industry on dealing with microaggressions?
That's a very, very real issue. And I'm glad that you brought that up because it happens. And as a Black male, you don't want to come across as being confrontational because then you feel like, I'm putting my career at risk. Or, people won't understand or say, oh, it's just in your head. That's, they don't understand or they don't get it. I think that it starts with a little bit of accountability from an organization standpoint and, starting to take a look at your hiring practices. And I don't think that's something that's going to be, fixed overnight. That's going to be an ongoing conversation. That's going to be an ongoing process. And that really won't change until you have a diverse leadership group and not just gender, So if you don't have people in leadership that can support and understand these experiences when, an employee makes a claim, that they won't go disregard it as they may have in the past if it even comes up. Because a lot of times you just keep it to yourself or you'll go home and call one of your friends and they'll know exactly what you're talking about. But if you share that with, your white coworker, they'll say, I don't really understand. I didn't see it, or maybe you're looking at it wrong.
Right. I mean, it seems like the PR industry in particular has spent, the last few years has made tremendous and amazing progress around gender, right? I mean, we now have women on almost all leadership committees. We have female CEOs of some of the top 5 agencies, which was unheard of 5 years ago. Do you think some of that same energy can be, or even resources or thinking can be applied to having more diverse leadership as well, outside of just gender, like actually having people of color in the leadership ranks?
Absolutely. I think that, the same priority which has been in the industry in terms of having, more diverse female leadership should be applied, to, from a race perspective. I feel like people have talked about it, but haven't really done anything. But I think it's a matter of, acknowledgement and, really understanding that you have to do something different from a recruiting standpoint, and, giving people opportunities.
Right. And what I always find key is like an opportunity to grow within the organization, right? I mean, some organizations, they at the junior ranks, they have diversity, but then as you start to move up the ladder, right, it seems like there's a gap between who's actually getting promoted, who's staying at the organization long enough to get promoted.
Right.
So I think that's key. One of the things that you said in your blog that really hit was how, the day that you published the blog, you wanted to take a PTO day, you wanted to take a mental health day. And I wonder, at a time where we're dealing with so much stress already. I mean, well, first of all, PR already is a high stress work environment, right? And then plus we're dealing with with a pandemic. We're dealing with having, as we talked about at the beginning of the call, having kids in the house, you know, juggling so many stressors. And then now, you know, especially for Black employees, I mean, there's a civil rights movement happening.
Right.
What advice would you give, both, you know, it could be agency and it could be brand, about how to take care of your Black employees right now?
I think I think it starts with the senior leadership within your organization, reaching out to just be a human, you know, and just think about someone other than yourself for a minute and just kind of understand what's going on. If you have any sort of relationship with your employees, it's taking a moment to say, hey, you know, how are you doing, you know, or just giving them an opportunity to talk. And I know that it is uncomfortable, or you feel like, hey, you know, I don't want to offend anybody, or I don't want to say the wrong thing. But, you know, just some sort of a communication to, you know, acknowledge that, you know, that there's, you know, issues going on, and, you know, just trying to be a little bit more understanding, because we all, you know, kind of have different outlets on, you know, how we cope with stress factors. You know, so it's like, if you notice something different about your employee, don't just say, you know, okay, this person is disengaged, or, you know, they're not focused. You know, just kind of figure out what's going on with them, and take into consideration, you know, the climate that we're in today. So I don't think that was particularly happening previously. So, you know, hopefully now, you know, people are starting to try to have those conversations, and be more human.
Right. So a year from now, in an ideal world, where would you like us to be? And not even an ideal world. I mean, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to say a year from now, given the momentum of this moment, how do we carry this forward, and where would you like to see us be a year from now?
From an industry standpoint, or
yeah, both industry and brand. It'd be interesting to get your perspective on both.
You know, well, from a country standpoint, I would hope and pray that we would have shown a little bit more progression from a political standpoint in terms of police reform, and, you know, understanding that, you know, some things need to be changed. And really, you know, from that standpoint, it's just about accountability. That's it. You know, just, you know, having equal due process, just in terms of, you know, what the ramifications are for police brutality and things like that. You know, just having to be able to have the same experience as, you know, a white male counterpart who is just the same as me, but just a different skin color. Mm-hmm. So, you know, those are the things that, you know, will be the first step and the first start to really making a change in the community. And from a PR industry standpoint, you know, from a year from now, hopefully people have been having conversations and they're starting to get some sort of understanding that, you know, we see some sort of an uptick from a hiring and a promotion standpoint. Because I think one thing that brands fail to realize, that when you have a diverse employee base, it only makes you better, because in different perspective, I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings with people and they say, well, oh, I didn't think of that, or I didn't even realize that. And, you know, that's not wrong. It's not their fault. It's just that we all have different perspectives, you know, different cultures, and it helps make us to be better, more rounded as an organization. And instead of seeing it as a threat and seeing it as an asset, you know, I think that would be a huge difference. And really just making people a little bit more comfortable in terms of expressing themselves at work.
Right.
And also less tolerance for ignorance.
Yeah.
You know, in the workplace. So as you mentioned before, a lot of times, you know, there's just subtle instances where, you know, as a Black person, you could be you're the minority. So there might be a couple of you in an organization you have 200 employees in your organization, and there could be 5 Black people maybe that work there. Yeah. So taking that into consideration, things that you might hear that you feel are a little ignorant and racist, just having the ability to communicate like, hey, I this didn't make me feel good. Let me explain this to you, why. Or, having other people hold their coworkers accountable if they hear something, and, putting them to the carpet and saying, listen, like, you can't act like that, or like having zero tolerance. I think those are the things that, are very feasible. Whether or not they're implemented within a year, I don't know, but that would be real change.
Right. I mean, I think that's really key. It's like less tolerance for ignorance, because so many of
Right.
the microaggressions, they come from a place of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes the day-to-day work environments for employees of color. It can impact women. It can specifically impact women of color, Black women in particular.
Right.
That I think from the conversations I've had, and I mean, honestly, even just my own experience, I mean, dealing with the microaggressions would really help change the work environment.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
So Reggie, this has been a really great conversation. Is there anything that I haven't asked about that you want to mention?
I think that brands really have an opportunity to make change in society, because brands have political clout, they have tax revenue, and when brands start holding local politicians accountable for their actions and behavior, I think you can really start, seeing a difference, and that's when they're really being corporate citizens. So if you're a brand and you have a large amount of employees in that particular city, and you make a stance and you say, listen, like, we're not going to tolerate being in this city if you continue to act like this, or if things don't change with the police department or whatever the case may be, you can really make an impact in the world. So it's really brands understanding their power and not just taking a safe route and saying, hey, we don't want to, anger a portion of our consumer base. So at some point, you just have to take a stance on what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong. So when brands have the courage to do that, I think that you'll see a big difference on a number of levels.
How much progress do you think we've seen in terms of brands using their power, or understanding how much power they have in the situation to say, yes, like, we won't have our HQ in the city unless you guys deal with this. I mean, we saw brands stand up in that way around LGBTQ, right? So I mean, how much progress do you think we've made around brands doing this around police?
I don't think it's a voice that they've used much. I mean, you brought up a good point. You can go back. I think from a sports standpoint, you saw it a little bit with the NBA, with Charlotte and the NBA All-Star game, and removing Donald Sterling as owner of the Clippers. So sports has been a little bit more progressive, but there's still a lot more that can be done. So imagine if the Minnesota Vikings and the Minnesota Timberwolves stepped up and made it a call to action. I know it's, sounds easier than it may sound like, it's easy to just go out and do this and make these change, but, they do have the power to, influence the local government and, impact society.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Well, this is a really important conversation, and I hope that we will, two things. I hope that you continue to post. I hope there's a follow-up to your blog. And I also hope that we can continue this conversation. When I speak to industry leaders right now, many of them are in listening mode right now. So this seems like there's a moment right now that we can really impact change. So Reggie, I hope that you keep talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that brands are in listening mode. That's the action that's the part of this phase that they should be in. But then action and deliverables are
great.
So I'm always here, and I enjoyed speaking with you, and let's keep this going.
Absolutely. Well, this was another episode of the PRovoke Media podcast. I want to thank Reggie Dance, our guest, and I want to thank Marketeers, our production team, and we will be back soon with another episode.
All right, great, thank you.
You've been listening to the PRovoke podcast, brought to you by PRovoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.